Title 1 caught my cheating wife and Ked in bed, waiting for her lover. She never expected what happened next. Trust is a delicate thing. Handing someone a loaded gun and praying they don't pull the trigger. I used to believe in it, in the sanctity of love, in the vows we exchanged. But standing outside room 210 of the Ritz Hotel in Paris, staring at the name registered under my wife's alias, I realized I had been a fool. My name is Leonard Devereaux, a senior partner at one of Europe's most powerful investment firms. I dealt in numbers, risks, and people who played dirty to win. My instincts were razor-sharp in business, yet in my own marriage, I had been blind. Celeste, my wife of 5 years, was stunning. Flowing red hair, piercing green eyes, and a presence that commanded attention. We were the power couple everyone envied. But lately, something had shifted. Her perfume had changed, a floral scent unfamiliar to me. Her once predictable schedule had become erratic. Her phone, once carelessly left on the nightstand, was now glued to her palm, always face down. And the intimacy? It had vanished. I convinced myself it was stress, work, life, excuses. Until one night, Celeste stumbled into our penthouse at 2 a.m., half drunk, a hotel keycard tucked into her purse. "It's a colleague's," she murmured. I was just holding on to it. I didn't question her. I didn't argue. Instead, I made a decision. It took less than 48 hours to uncover the truth. My connections provided me with everything I needed: surveillance, hotel records, messages. Celeste had been seeing someone, not just anyone, Matthew Laurent, a cocky, high-profile entrepreneur, younger than me, who had recently secured a major deal with my firm. We had shaken hands, exchanged pleasantries. He had smiled in my face while sneaking into my wife's bed. The betrayal was textbook. A wife craving excitement. A younger man, drunk on his own invincibility. A husband who was supposed to never find out. But they had underestimated me. That evening, I told Celeste I had an emergency business trip to Geneva. She barely masked her relief. The moment she texted Matthew to confirm their plans, I was watching in real time, thanks to the spyware I had installed on her phone. Room 210, Ritz Hotel, 9 p.m. By 8:50 p.m., I was already inside the hotel. By 8:58 p.m., I was standing outside their room. By 9:01 p.m., I kicked the door open, hard enough to shake the walls. And that's when hell began. The door slammed open with a force that echoed through the luxurious suite. Celeste was sprawled across the bed, naked, waiting. Her head snapped toward me, a soft, sultry smile still frozen on her lips before sheer horror took over. Her body jerked upright, hands scrambling for the silk sheets, clutching them around her like they could somehow undo her betrayal. "Leo," she gasped, voice shaking. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me with deliberate calm. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. I had prepared for this moment. "Shut up. Sit still." The words left my mouth with eerie detachment. She obeyed instantly. From the bathroom, I heard the sound of running water cutting off, the shuffle of footsteps, and then the smug, oblivious voice of a man who had no idea he was stepping into a nightmare. "Darling, I'm coming to you." The bathroom door opened, steam curling around the figure stepping out. Matthew Laurent, dripping wet, a towel slung low around his waist, that same cocky smirk plastered on his face, until he saw me. He froze, towel in one hand, muscles tensing. Then, like the arrogant bastard he was, the smirk returned. "Well, well," he chuckled, shaking his head. "I guess the husband finally found out." His eyes flicked to Celeste, then back to me. "What now, Devereaux? You gonna cry about it?" I smiled. He had no idea. I took a single step forward. My fists clenched. Matthew barely had time to process the shift in atmosphere before my knuckles buried themselves into his stomach. The impact stole his breath, his body folding over as a sharp gasp escaped him. He staggered, knocking over a chair, one hand clutching his abdomen as he wheezed. You're making a mistake," he managed between labored breaths. I grabbed a fistful of his hair, yanking his head up, forcing him to meet my gaze. His confidence was gone, replaced by something else. Fear. I leaned in, whispering so only he could hear. Feel your crushed balls jump to your chin. And then, I drove my knee straight into his groin. The sound that came from Matthew's mouth? Poetic. A high-pitched, choked scream as he crumpled to the floor like a dying insect, hands flying to his obliterated pride. From the bed, Celeste let out a horrified sob. I turned to her, voice cold. "You chose him over me?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Because she knew. She knew she had just lost everything. Matthew writhed on the floor, curled up, moaning like a wounded animal. Celeste sat frozen on the bed, the silk sheets tangled around her shaking body. I stood over them both, silent, unmoved. This was only the beginning. "Get dressed," I ordered. Celeste hesitated. "Now." She scrambled off the bed, hands trembling as she pulled on her dress. Matthew, still curled up, groaned out something pathetic. You maniac. You'll regret this." I knelt beside him, my face inches from his. "Oh." My voice was deathly quiet. "Will I?" I grabbed his jaw, forcing him to look at me. "By the time I'm done with you, you won't have a career. You won't have your money. You won't even have the arrogance to smirk at another man's wife again." His eyes widened. He finally understood. I forced Celeste to walk out of the hotel with me, her head down, her face flushed with shame. The chauffeur opened the car door. "Drive." The car glided through the dimly lit streets of Paris, silence suffocating the space between us. Finally, Celeste spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Leonard, please, we can fix this." I didn't even look at her. "Fix this?" I scoffed. "You threw everything away. You gambled. And you lost." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You still love me," she pleaded. "You wouldn't have reacted like this if you didn't." I turned to her, my gaze like stone. "You're mistaken, Celeste. This isn't about love." I leaned back in my seat, exhaling slowly. "This is about justice." Celeste shuddered at my words. Justice. She finally understood that this was not a moment of anger. It was the beginning of her downfall. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Are you going to divorce me?" I tilted my head, studying her. "Divorce? No. That would be too simple. Too painless." "No, Celeste," I said, my voice chillingly calm. "That would be merciful. I want you to experience true loss first." She sucked in a sharp breath, her body trembling. She knew what was coming. The next morning, as the sun cast golden streaks over the Paris skyline, I began my work. Revenge is best served with precision, not rage. The first move? Financial obliteration. Matthew's investments? Frozen. I had my firm initiate an audit on his accounts. Within 24 hours, his biggest investors pulled out, tanking his company's value. His career? Destroyed. I personally leaked insider information to the financial press. His involvement in shady dealings, his reckless investments. By evening, his name was smeared across every major business channel. His reputation? Ruined. I had Marcus, my private investigator, send intimate photos of him and Celeste to everyone in his professional circle. Clients, colleagues, partners. His face would now be associated not with success, but with disgrace. Then, I made the call that ended him. A quiet conversation with the French tax authorities about certain offshore accounts Matthew had hidden. His assets? Seized. His home? Raided. His future? Non-existent. By the end of the week, Matthew Laurent had lost everything. Celeste watched it all unfold from our penthouse, her once arrogant posture replaced with defeat. She knew she was next, and I made sure she felt every ounce of her own destruction. I arranged for a charity gala, the kind where Europe's financial elite gathered in dazzling gowns and tailored suits, sipping expensive wine while exchanging calculated smiles. Matthew, ever the fool, still thought he could recover. He had no idea what awaited him. When he entered the ballroom that night, he was met with whispers, laughter, disgust, and then, the final blow. A giant LED screen in the middle of the hall lit up. One by one, his most private, pathetic messages to Celeste flashed across it. Sleazy, desperate, humiliating. Gasps filled the room. Murmurs turned into chuckles. The smirks turned into outright laughter. Matthew stood frozen, his face ghost white as the entire room mocked him. And then, security escorted him out. His career? Gone. His dignity? Shattered. His future? Non-existent. Celeste sat across from me later that night, silent. Her emerald eyes were hollow, drained of their fire. The reality had sunk in. She had lost everything. Her wealth? Gone. Her status? Shattered. Her lover? Destroyed. And then, I placed the divorce papers in front of her. She blinked at them, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the pages. "You'll sign these," I said, my tone devoid of emotion, "and you'll walk out of here with nothing." Her lower lip quivered. "Leonard, please," she whispered. "You don't have to do this." I leaned forward, my gaze piercing into hers. "You did this," I said. "I'm just finishing it." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stared at the documents. "And where will I go?" she choked out. I shrugged. "That's not my problem anymore." She knew she had no choice. With shaking hands, she signed the papers. I stood, slipping my coat over my shoulders. As I walked to the door, I glanced back one last time. Celeste was no longer the radiant, confident woman she once was. She was a hollow shell of herself, and I felt nothing. Not pity, not regret, nothing. I turned back to the door, my final words falling like a death sentence. Never mistake a man's kindness for weakness. Betrayal doesn't end in heartbreak. It ends in war. And then, I walked away. Forever. It took me months to purge the bitterness from my soul. The rage, the betrayal, the wounds Celeste had left behind. It all had to be burned away. But in the end, I emerged stronger, wiser, untouchable. And Celeste? She faded into obscurity. Stripped of her wealth, her status, and her precious lover, she disappeared from the world we once shared. I never looked back. As for Matthew, the last I heard, he was bouncing between failed job interviews and mounting lawsuits. Penniless. Forgotten. A ghost of the man who once smirked at me. Poetic justice. Because revenge isn't about anger. It's about precision. And I had executed mine flawlessly. I stood on the balcony of my new home, high above the city, as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air smelled of possibility, of a future untainted by deception. I had built an empire, and no one would ever take that from me again. Betrayal is an expensive lesson, and those who underestimate a man's patience will one day kneel before his vengeance. The end.